So, okay, on January 18th of 2016, Astralis was formed in CSGO. So the Danish company, backed by Refresh and with some ownership of some of the shares by some of the players of the core that was formerly Dignitas, TSM. And then in the meantime, between leaving TSM and forming Astralis, they were called Team Question Mark, you might remember. Now, interestingly enough, Astralis as a name is a pretty cool name. And actually, I have to say, the way that Danes pronounce it actually sounds even cooler than when Finn said, like Astralis. Like, that actually sounds pretty cool. But I actually think there was a missed opportunity in even picking that name, because when we were looking into, me and Richard and a few others were looking into the Refresh organization, and if they owned some of these teams, primarily like Astralis, God Sent Heroic, teams like that, we will try and look as to which they owned and to what degree. When you look up the company information on the Danish public databases, it's quite cool, that stuff's all available, you actually see that it seems like originally the company was registered as Spirit of Amiga and then became Astralis. Now, the reason that's interesting is because Spirit of Amiga is also a classic organization name from 1.6 and was a Danish organization. In fact, it was the first ever great Danish Counter-Strike team many moons ago. We're talking the beginning of the 2000s, the very beginning of Counter-Strike, and its first big tournaments, the CPL Europes, in 2000, 2001 in Europe. And they actually had... It only lasted a couple of years, and they had a team later on, but it wasn't as great. But they were the first truly great Danish organizations that won all three of these series against the best ranked teams in the world, 2-0, winning each time with their opponent's map pick as well. Never even going to a third map pick. Over the tournament, including week 1, which is technically part of the major, they played 14 maps. They won 12 of the 14 maps, and the only 2 losses were best of ones, which both went to overtime. The theme of Astralis' time together is quite fitting to this dominant performance that they had, because they're a team that won 4 titles. They were top 4 every single tournament except the first. When they lost to every tournament except the first, it was always to the team that went on to win the final. So in some of the ones when they finished top 4, they might actually have been the second best team there. They have been an incredibly tough team to beat. Most opponents do not even get double digits in each map against Astralis. So winning this major, added to the other titles, added to the dominance of how they won those titles, added to how rarely they lose, added to all the top 4s, to the dominance across the map pool, to what the eye test tells you, to the individual players and how they fit together, how they've innovated, revitalized, rethought Counter-Strike itself. Yes, this cements an era for Astralis. The age of Astralis, as I will dub it. They won the major. They've won other big titles, the biggest of the year. They've had consistent top finishes. They've beaten every possible opponent. They have no true rivals. They are the team of the era. Then you consider, how tough is it to ever string rounds together against Astralis? They're incredible at building their economy, so they're never having to do those saves, because when they do the full 2 saves, and they will play low econ with just a pistol and a smoke grenade or a flash. Then they're unbelievable at breaking economy. Like, by the time we got to this major, they were one of the best teams in the entire world at fucking force buying. They were so phenomenal these last few months. So amazing CT side, some of the best T sides in the entire game, notably on Nuke, where they won 18 games in a row, never been beaten on that particular map on LAN. Then you consider they have amazing force buys. They're also the best pure gun round team. They're amazing at saving to keep the gun round economy very strong. Then you go to the map pool. Is there anywhere where we can at least play them? Is there an opponent that can play them? No, impossible map pool. The only map they don't play is Cash, a map that they used to be pretty decent on when forced to play it with the old lineup. Every other map, literally every other map in the map pool, is like 65% or higher win rate. Some of them 80%. They can play all these maps. Even a map like Train, they weren't playing much. People tried it against them. Yeah, they won all 3 of those games in the last few months. There is no way you can go in the map pool. They are unbelievably good. Hence why they win their opponent's map. Hence why it's so hard to ever beat them. Hence why something like 1 map in the entire time they've been together, I think it's since the since like IAM Katowice, I believe. Since then, there's only been 1 map where they didn't get double digits themselves. That was like 7 months ago. This is outrageous stuff. And they've done all of this in terms of the championships in a 6-month span. That's how fucking insanely dominant this team.
Astralis has been amazing at making opposing teams look worse. About the only team that's ever looked good realistically against Na'Vi on any consistent basis is probably Na'Vi. Na'Vi's had some pretty good games against them and been able to get their style off. Everyone else has either had occasional games that were good. FaZe had that amazing game I Am Chicago, and at the beginning at Katowice. Then you go and you look at like MIBR's had some good matches against them, even beat them in a best of 3. Still didn't look like significantly better than them or anything. Other than that, every team, including the ones I've named, they've also just smashed. They've also just taken care of very easily. They've also dismantled entirely and made them look worse than they do against others. Same goes for star players in the game. You look at people like Simple, like Nico, like coldzera. They look less impactful against Astralis. They can't get off what they want to get off against Astralis. They can't play their style in the same way and have the same success against Astralis. If you put a team like FaZe Clan against a team like Na'Vi, FaZe Clan might win as they did at Epicenter, but Simple will still go off. You can't stop him going off if you're FaZe Clan. You don't have any of the tools to do that. You can't even game plan around what to do against him. If you go against Simple or you go against coldzera and you're Astralis, you really can limit these guys even when they're at their absolute peaks. You can make them play worse. You can make them have an average game, and in doing so, massively open up the chances for you to be the one who wins that game. George St. Pierre, also funnily enough, is someone who he had very few finishes. He had a lot of decision games. Well, likewise, why do people call Astralis boring? Because either they just look like they cruise past you without players individually popping off, in which case it just looks boring, or they make it look impossible, like it's unfair, like the other team don't have the chance to. So in the same way as when people were fighting against GSP, the real reason people said GSP was boring is because they'd be a massive fan of the guy he was fighting, Nick Diaz, Carlos Conde, and they'd be like, wow, I can't wait to see this guy go and show his best against GSP. Then he'd fight GSP and they'd go, oh, he never got a chance to, he couldn't hit, GSP wouldn't fight him, or he was running away from him, or he just wrestle fucked him. And what they really mean is, I want GSP to just stand there, let my favourite fighter try BJJ techniques on him, punch him, like just brawl and bang. Like, they're basically just mad that they want a more simplistic version of MMA to win out over GSP style, and they're not acknowledging at all that it's not that their fighter couldn't do it, get off. He couldn't because GSP was stopping him. That's the key point to understand here. When Astralis just shut down a whole Inferno CT side and you can't do shit against them, that isn't failure of the T side and the in-game leader of the opponent. That's an incredible CT team player display that you're not going to see from very many other teams, not least because CT side of Inferno is so hard to play. When you see Astralis just roll over teams on their T-side, when it's a fucking CT-sided map and win way more T-sides and T-rounds than anyone else in the game, that's not anything to do with like, oh, they wouldn't fight properly or play properly. They're doing something no one else in this game can do. That's the level of greatness we're talking about, which is why it makes the opponent look bad.
So one of the reasons I make this video that Astralis proved Valve wrong is because Astralis to me represent those elite tier teams who have an excellent coach, but actually it's not that their coach being allowed to speak would make them overpowered. It's that coaches not being allowed to speak has made Astralis even more overpowered than they already would be. Because think of it this way, which would Astralis, relative to every other team, gain more of an edge from? If Zonic could also talk during every round, when they have already the best in-game leader in Counter-Strike, tactical in-game leader, Glaive, or would they gain more from only Glaive being allowed to speak all the time, as is currently the case, and Zonic being able to speak in timeouts? Now, Astralis is clearly, they've already shown this. They are so far ahead because they not only have a great coach, but they have the best in-game leader. So they've comboed it to make it so actually it would help other teams to have a coach who could talk in-game to help try and even up some of the disparity. Whereas Astralis wouldn't gain that much more having Zonic. Like, think about one of the all-time great teams that did have the coach as the in-game leader was obviously the Na'Vi team that was directly hit by this move. Because at the time, Starks was their in-game leader, not Zeus, which is why before this move, they'd cut Zeus and brought Simple on because they thought, we've got Starks as in-game leader. He's doing a fucking amazing job. Imagine the Starks-led Na'Vi going against this Astralis. Already you can see how having a coach who could have that role and then have a Zeus in-game, how fucking amazing would that be? Plus, if you had someone like Guardian as an AWPer in that kind of a system, and then with someone who can look at all the POVs, who can focus on the macro picture while you focus on the micro, and can help move this guy around, that could be something that makes up for the disparity between Guardian and Device in terms of being mobile AWPers, in terms of making adaptations that AWPers like Guardian can don't typically make, but which Device has been able to make. Another advantage that Astralis has had. In the context of the fact that, yes, they're still unbeaten with this lineup on Nuke. They've won 29 games in a row on that. People people get too caught up in thinking, right, so they're a specialist on Nuke. No, they're absurdly good on Inferno as well. I think they've won something mental with this lineup on LAN. Like 41 games out of 51 played on Inferno. That's fucking bonkers. You could make an argument with the sample size, the quality of opponents you're playing, and the meta of the map, meaning that other teams generally don't get those kind of win rates. Then arguably their Inferno's even better than their Nuke when you consider how many more times they've played it. Generally, the map pool for Astralis is just way too good. I'm going to have a lot of content coming on this soon. Videos and written. I mean, at this major alone, Astralis won on all 6 of the maps that they play, with the caveat being that they permaban cash and don't play it. That's how absurdly good this team is. As I said, they didn't lose any maps in the playoffs. They were just winning the opponent's pick no matter what it was, every single fucking time, no matter who it is. Generally, Astralis, as you'd expect from a team this dominant, is a nearly flawless team. I mean, with the exception of Glaive, everyone had great stats in this tournament. Everyone had series where they were the better players, they took over, they dominated, they beat the opposing team's best performers. Everyone played great generally. The team play was there. They looked as good as ever as a team. Remember, this is a team that when they were really, really hot in the spring going into the summer of last year, people made out as though, well, we'll see how long this lasts. It's like they look better now than they did then. They've won more championships in the latter half of their time with this 5-man lineup than they did in the first half, including like a couple of majors. I'm not quite sure if the first major would quite tick over in the second half or not. It's absurd. And they're also a team that just doesn't lose 2 tournaments in a row, something I'll get to later on. So let's talk now about the history element, which is what is the context of the greatness of what we've seen here? Because obviously this is Astralis' era already. It's the age of Astralis. So you're talking now not just about great things you've done today, but things that match up against all of history. So in terms of the accomplishment, they win their 3rd major title, or at least Device, Dupree, Xyp9x and Glaive do. That ties them with JW, Flusher and Pronax for the most majors ever won in CSGO history. And remember, this is a scenario that's worth pointing out. When Fnatic was in their prime, there were 3 majors a year. During the entire time that Astralis has existed, there have only been 2 majors a year, and yet they're already at the same count as the Fnatic boys. I think personally, if there'd have been 3 majors a year, we'd had 3 majors last year, and this would in theory now be the 4th major that this Astralis lineup let me think. No, it'd be the 3rd major this Astralis lineup could have played. Well, obviously they already could have gone past this and set a record of their own. I think they would smash, by the end of this lineup, they would smash that record. I think they'd have 5, 6 majors under their belts. As anyone who followed the old StarCraft Korean Brood War scene knows, when you have that era of a year and a half, 2 years or so, you got to have a lot of tournaments in then to get them. That's how you get the 4, 5, 6 OSL, MSL combined titles that the Nadas, Jadongs, Flashes of the world were able to get towards. I love Uv, Savior. You can see it's not just about majors. It's about being not only the #1 team, potentially winning the major. It's about being dominant. It's about having a set period of time where this period of time is all about you. Even if you lose, you losing is a bigger storyline actually than one of your rivals winning or one of your underdogs winning. Just like Na'Vi winning ESL 1 Cologne was less about Na'Vi than it was about, wow, Astralis lost to them in the semi-finals. DreamHack Masters Stockholm. North winning was incredible, but it was less about North winning than, holy fuck, they beat Astralis twice. They took the title from them. That's because one of the factors Astralis had that also has ended now with this loss was once they won DreamHack Masters Marseille, the event back in 2018, from which point most people inside, not in the world rankings, considered them the best team in the world, the team to beat. From that period until Blast Pro Series Madrid yesterday, they had never failed to bounce back from a loss. So if they lost at IEM Sydney, they bounced right back and won EPL. If they lost at ESL 1 Cologne, then they bounced right back afterwards and they won a different tournament. If they lost, you see the point here, every time they lost, they won the very next tournament, which is an insane feat. I think that might be, at the end, the best feat they ever accomplished, because that is mind-boggling. Teams like Fnatic can't brag that, SKM can't brag that, NIP can, nobody can. That is actually the most insane run that they were having, better than the streaks on Nuke or Inferno, or better than even the number of finals they were in. I think that might be the most telling sign of their dominance. Well, that's over as well, because thanks to them making the last 3 real events they played, not counting the group stage of EPL, Blast Pro Series events, they would have had to have won 2 out of 3, and they only won 1 out of 3. They lost 2 in a row, so that whole thing of bouncing back from event losses is over. I mean, yes, at an event that's not very meaningful, sure, you could say this event doesn't matter, but if this event doesn't matter, skip the rest of the video. You just made the point for me that their era ended by them just not being active, just not playing. Quite frankly, this is the part of the video that's a eulogy for the Astralis era. It's the only era in the history of CSGO that was ended willingly by the team themselves. Go look at Nip's era. They're still fucking going ham after their era. Fnatic, they're still attending seemingly every event. They're trying their hardest. They're getting top 4s, they're getting finals, but they just can't win. You go look at SK. SK was still semis, finals. They attended a lot of tournaments before they even made the FNX change. And they gambled their legacy. They weren't able to continue their legacy, but they at least put it on the line, right? They died in battle, losing their legacy. They didn't just give the legacy to someone else. They didn't just give up their era. Now, when I say gamble your legacy, gamble your era, I'm not talking about we wipe out all the past majors and tournaments. Who the fuck would suggest that? Only a cretin. I'm saying that you can't continue it. Yes, it's the greatest era. It could have been even greater. That's the worst thing about this. That's why it's not okay, Glaive. Because you had a chance to do something insane. You've already done the best thing ever in the history of Counter-Strike. Your era, your feat in doing so is the best ever. And you know what? You had a chance to do more. You had a chance to go 3 majors back to back to back covering your era. Something none of the others did. Not Fnatic, not NIP didn't even win 2 majors. Not SK who won 2 majors. Fnatic and SK won back-to-back majors. They could never make it 3 in a row. You could have made it 2 whole years of domination. Something even NIP didn't come close to doing. You could have set an impossible standard for the modern day with this thing where you made the finals practically every event, where you win 1 out of every 2 events that are held. This is greatness on a level we may never see again, even from this Astralis core. And you gave all of that up for what? What did it cost? Everything. Your era is over.
Oh yeah? You and whose army? Well, how about the Skrilluminati for one? They're the people who support my content. This video was kindly supported by The Concept, Matt, Pugnatio, Rajcula, Toucan, Jensen Goh, Tosh, Jasun, Banediesel, Animosity, and you know it, everyone does. A special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion, for the long-term support. Do you want to ask a question for my AMA videos? Would you like teasers? Find out what upcoming guests I've got? You want to suggest a topic or a guest? Maybe you want to be part of one of those 1-hour lengthy online discussions I do where the topics are set by you. Well, if any of these perks or more tickle your fancy, I think you know what to do by now. Put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati, where Patreon link in the description below.